I remember the smell of it first, not the blood, though there was plenty of that, and not the burning either. Though the sky had been orange for 3 days straight by the time the thing crawled out of the deep. No. What I remember first, what woke me up every night for years afterward in cold sweats on the cot I barely fit, is the smell. Like the ocean, but wrong. Like something that had lived in the ocean for a very long time, had decided the ocean wasn't good enough anymore, and had started eating it from the inside out. Salt and rot and something else underneath, something that didn't have a name in any language I'd ever heard, and I'd heard plenty of languages. Most of them screaming. My name is Grukk Ironjaw, and I was the biggest warboss the Waaagh had ever produced on this particular patch of rocks they called a planet. And I am telling you this, not because I am proud of it, though I was once, but because you need to understand what it means to be the biggest. The biggest means you fight everything. The biggest means when something new crawls out of wherever new things crawl from, they bring it to you. They bring it to you because you are the biggest, and the biggest is supposed to win, and winning is supposed to mean something. I had fought humans in their clanking tin suits. I had fought the pointy-eared ones who moved like water and talked like they were disappointed in the universe. I had fought the walking metal skeletons that didn't stay down no matter how many times you took them apart. I had fought other orcs, which was the best kind of fighting because they fought back properly, with enthusiasm and joy and no pretense about why we were doing it. We were doing it because it was fun, because that's what we were made for. The thing that came out of the sky in the 3rd month of what my boys had started calling the long green summer, which was neither long nor particularly green since most of the vegetation had already been trampled flat, did not fight back with enthusiasm. It did not fight back with anything I recognized as fighting. It did something else entirely, and it took me a long time to understand what it was doing, and by the time I understood it, I was not entirely sure I was still myself. Let me start at the beginning. Let me start at the last night before everything changed, when I was still simple and complete and the biggest thing in every room I walked into. The camp sprawled across the valley like something alive, which it was. In the way that a mass of bodies breathing and arguing and sharpening blades and eating things that probably didn't deserve to be eaten is alive. Fires everywhere. The smell of roasting meat and hot metal, and that particular orc smell that humans always described badly when they tried to describe it. Usually right before they stopped being able to describe anything. My tent was the biggest tent, naturally, because I was the biggest. And it was held up with poles made from the bones of things I'd killed personally, which was my habit and my preference. It kept things organized. You could look at my tent and know immediately what I thought was worth killing. My second, a clever backstabber named Musghal, who'd been trying to replace me for 6 years and had the scars to prove how that had been going, sat across from me with a map spread between us. Not a good map. Orc maps are never good maps in the way that other species mean good maps. They are accurate about what matters, which is where the fighting is, and where the food is, and where the big stuff lives, and completely indifferent to everything else. Roads, elevation, scale, these things are suggestions. Something came down, Musghal said, and tapped a spot on the map that was marked with a skull, which could have meant anything from "there is something dangerous here" to "I drew a skull here because it seemed right at the time." 3 of the scouting parties didn't come back. I ate what was in front of me. I chewed it thoroughly. I thought about scouts not coming back, which was not unusual. Scouts not coming back happened all the time. Scouts were not especially good at their jobs because the best fighters didn't become scouts. How big? Musghal spread his arms as wide as they'd go and then looked frustrated at his own arms, like they weren't adequate to the task. "Bigger," he said. That got my attention. I had a rule, simple as all my rules were simple, which was that anything bigger than me deserved personal investigation. Not because I was afraid of it, understand. Because anything bigger than me had gotten there somehow, and I wanted to know how, and more importantly, I wanted to know if I could take it. This was not arrogance. This was professional curiosity. I had been the biggest for a long time, and the only way to stay the biggest was to keep having this particular conversation with everything that thought it was bigger. We went out at dawn, me and Musghal and 40 of the best, which in our case meant 40 of the meanest, which meant 40 individuals who had demonstrated repeatedly that they would keep hitting something long after it stopped hitting back, just to be certain. I'd seen them in action. I trusted them the way I trusted a good blade. They would do what I needed them to do. The valley that Musghal's skull had indicated was different in a way I felt before I saw. The smell hit first. That wrong ocean smell threaded through the morning air like a vein of something poisonous running through good rock. It stopped some of the boys mid-stride without them knowing why. This little hesitation, feet stuttering. And then they pressed forward because they were my boys, and stopping was for something else entirely. But the hesitation was there. I noticed it. I filed it, then the sound. Or the absence of sound, which in the valley was worse, because this valley had been noisy the day before, had been full of scavengers and the things that ate scavengers and the things that ate those things. The whole busy ecology of violence that follows a Waaagh like a second army, all of it was gone. The silence was not natural silence. Natural silence is just quiet. This silence was something that had eaten all the noise and was still hungry. We came around the ridge, and I saw it for the first time, and I want to be very precise about this, because precision matters here in a way it has never mattered before in my life. What I saw was a color I did not have a word for. That was the first thing, not a shape, not a size. A color that my eyes kept trying to translate into something familiar and failing. The way you might try to read something written in a language that uses your alphabet but means entirely different things. The color was where the valley floor should have been, and it was moving. Musghal made a sound next to me that I had never heard from him before, and I had known him for 11 years. Had heard him make every sound a large green creature can make, including several I'd caused personally during disputes about authority. This was a new sound. It came out small and involuntary, like something being squeezed from him without his permission. The color resolved slowly as we stood there on the ridge and looked at it. My brain kept trying to make sense of it the way a brain does, kept trying to find shapes inside it. And what it found were suggestions of shapes, outlines of things that were almost familiar, that could almost be named if you looked at them from the right angle. And then you'd shift slightly, and the angle would be wrong, and the almost name would slip away, and your mind would be left holding the space where a thought had almost been. I recognized, standing on that ridge with the wrong smell filling my lungs and the wrong silence pressing against my ears, that whatever was in the valley was not a thing that you fought in the way I understood fighting. I recognized this, and then I did something I had not done since I was young and small, and the world was still full of things that could hurt me easily. I stood still, and I thought. This was not well received by the boys behind me. Thinking, in my culture, is a dangerous public display. It suggests uncertainty. Uncertainty suggests weakness. Weakness suggests opportunity. I could hear them shifting behind me. the small unconscious adjustments of bodies that were recalibrating their understanding of the hierarchy. And I knew that if I stood there thinking for too long, I would need to have a conversation with 40 individuals about the nature of leadership. And I would win that conversation. I was confident of that. But it would take time I did not currently have, because the color in the valley was moving. It was coming toward us, not fast. That was the thing that made it worse, in a way I'm still not equipped to explain properly. Fast things you respond to. Fast things activate the part of you that knows what to do, that has always known what to do, the old animal certainty. This was slow. This was the pace of something that did not need to hurry, because hurrying implied that you might escape, and it was not operating under that particular assumption. I went down into the valley. I want you to understand this clearly. I chose to go down. My boys went with me because that's what boys do when the Warboss goes somewhere, but I went first. And I went first because being the biggest has a specific and terrible obligation attached to it, which is that you do not wait for the thing to come to you. You go to the thing. Waiting is for things that are not the biggest. I had been the biggest for 20 years. I had certain standards to maintain. The closer we got, the more the color resolved. Or rather, the more my mind gave up trying to resolve it and started simply accepting it as a presence. The way you accept darkness in a very dark room. Not because the darkness becomes less dark, but because your mind exhausts itself fighting the darkness and decides that survival requires a different approach. What was in the valley was not one thing. I understood that as we approached. It was many things that had been brought together into something that moved and acted as one. A convergence, a gathering. And at the center of the gathering, where the color was deepest and the wrong smell was strongest and the silence was most complete, there was a shape. The shape was approximately the size of a large building. This is a meaningful comparison only if you understand that I had fought things the size of large buildings before and found them manageable, and that what made this different was not the size, but the quality of the size, the way it occupied space, which was less like a building and more like a suggestion that a building could exist here if reality were convinced to cooperate. My strongest boy, a mountain of muscle named Grukk, who'd never shown fear of anything living or dead, and who once bit through a metal door out of pure impatience, stopped walking about 30 feet from the edge of the color and said, very quietly, almost to himself, "What is that?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of a mind encountering its first real limit. I kept walking. Because I am the biggest. Because stopping was not something I did anymore. The moment I stepped into the color, something changed in how I was hearing things. The sounds of the world behind me, the shuffling of feet, the breathing of 40 large bodies, the distant background noise of the camp, all of it went to a different place. Not gone, just relocated. As if someone had taken the part of my mind that processed hearing and moved it slightly to the left. So that sounds arrived at a slight delay, like they were traveling through something thicker than air. The smell was overwhelming this close. The wrong ocean smell had a texture to it now, something that coated the inside of my mouth and throat and sat there, heavy and insistent. I could taste it. Like swallowing something that had dissolved in seawater for a very long time, something that was not quite organic and not quite mineral, but carried properties of both. I did not stop walking. I told myself I was not stopping because stopping was not what I did. I noticed very precisely that I was having to tell myself this, which was new. Normally, I did not walk toward things and then have an internal discussion about whether walking was the right choice. I just walked. The discussion was new. The shape at the center of the color began to move when I was 20 feet from it. It moved the way something moves when movement is not its natural state. When it has been at rest for long enough that it has begun to forget the mechanics of movement and must relearn them. Parts of it that should have been one piece separated and then reconnected differently. There was a sound to this, and I want to describe the sound carefully because it is important and because I spent a great deal of time afterward trying to find words for it. It was the sound of something very large breathing, but the breathing was wrong. Not wrong in rhythm or wrong in pace, but wrong in kind, the way the color was wrong in kind. Breathing that was doing something other than what breathing does, that was accomplishing some other purpose while also mimicking the motion of breathing. The way certain things can look like other things while being entirely different. I had a weapon. I want to be precise about this too. My weapon was the finest thing I'd ever made, which means I put more thought and effort into it than anything else in my life. 3 years of work, metal from 17 different sources, each one significant. Teeth from things I have killed personally, set into the housing at specific intervals. It was, by any honest measure, a masterwork. I had never been anything close to modest about it. I raised it. This is where the story should go a particular way. The war boss raises his weapon, the monster turns, battle commences. I know this story. I have lived this story more times than I can count. I am comfortable in this story. What happened instead was that the shape turned toward me, and I understood, in a single moment of complete and devastating clarity, that my weapon was irrelevant. Not that it would not hurt the thing. It might. I genuinely did not know. What I understood was that the question of whether my weapon would hurt the thing was not the interesting question. The interesting question, the only question the thing seemed to be asking, was something else entirely. And it was asking it not in words or signals or any form of communication I recognized, but in the quality of its attention. It was looking at me the way I had never been looked at before, not as an opponent, not as prey, not as an obstacle, as something that needed to be understood before it was used. Behind me, I heard a boy run. I did not look back. Running was happening. One of my boys, one of the 40 meanest I had, was running away from something for the first time in his life. And I could not blame him, and that inability to blame him was itself a kind of fracture in who I was. The shape moved closer. It moved through the color with a fluidity that made me understand, suddenly and completely, that the color was not a thing separate from the shape, but an extension of it, a territory. The way a shadow is an extension of the thing casting it, except that this was not passive, this was not a byproduct. This was intentional and active, and the color was how the thing experienced the space around it, or perhaps how it claimed the space around it. Or perhaps both. I swung my weapon, the swing connected with something. I want to be honest here, I do not know what it connected with. There was resistance. Something gave way, and then reformed. The weapon bit into whatever it bit into, and then the whatever closed around the weapon, and for a moment we were connected. The shape and I, through the medium of my weapon and whatever it had found in the shape to bite into. And in that moment of connection something moved down the weapon and into my hands. Not pain. I want to be clear. Not pain. Information. A quantity of information that my mind was not constructed to receive arrived in my hands and traveled up my arms and reached my brain, and my brain did what it could with it, which was not much. The way a bucket does what it can with a river, which is to overflow immediately and be reshaped by the process. What reached my brain after the overflow was not the information itself, but an impression of the information, a shape of it. The way you might press your hand into wet clay and understand from the impression something about the hand without having the hand. The impression was enormous, old. Not old in the way that old things are old, accumulation of time, erosion, history laid in layers. Old in the way that some things are old before time began, that exist in a relationship with time that is not the same as the relationship I have with time. The impression was purpose. Not a purpose I could name, not anything that mapped onto the purposes I understood, not fighting or eating or growing or surviving or winning, all of which were my purposes, the complete set of my purposes. Arranged in order of importance on a hierarchy I had never needed to consciously articulate before this moment. The purpose was something else, something that required a category of understanding I did not have. The third part of the impression was the worst. The third part was recognized, not recognized as a threat, not recognized as an opponent, recognized as a type, a category. The thing in the valley, the shape and the color, looked at me with whatever it used for looking and recognized me the way I might recognize a rock. Not individual, not specific. A representative of a class of objects that had previously been encountered, catalogued, and filed under a heading I could not read. I was a rock, a specific rock perhaps, a rock that had done some notable things for a rock, but the rock. I am the biggest. I have been the biggest for 20 years. I have made myself the biggest through a process of continuous and enthusiastic violence that was, until this moment, entirely sufficient as a way of relating to the universe. I pulled my weapon free. I swung again and again. I kept swinging because that is what I do, because the body does not stop just because the mind has been broken open and reshaped. Because 20 years of being the biggest creates a momentum that does not stop just because something has demonstrated, comprehensively and without apparent effort. That biggest is a category that does not interest it. Something happened on the 14th or 15th swing. I was not counting precisely. The shape did something that was not defending itself, and was not attacking me, and was not moving away from me. Something I watched happen at very close range because I was pressed against it, hitting it repeatedly with everything I had, and what it did was, it changed its mind about me. Or something changed, something shifted in the quality of its attention. The thing that had looked at me and seen a rock refocused, the way eyes refocus when something small and apparently insignificant does something that edges it toward interesting. Not interesting in the way I wanted to be interesting, not the interesting of an opponent worthy of real effort, but interesting. And then it spoke, not in words. I want to be clear, again and carefully, that what happened was not words. What happened was that the part of my mind that had been reorganized by the impression through the weapon was used. Like a tool. Like a door that had been installed while I was paying attention to other things was now opened. And what came through the door was not words but meaning, shapes of meaning, arrangements of significance that deposited themselves in my understanding without passing through language. What it said was, approximately, imprecisely, in the closest thing I have to translation, "You are fighting," which was true. I was fighting. I was doing the only thing I knew how to do in the presence of something larger than me. What it said next was, "Why?" And I opened my mouth to answer, which is when I understood that I had been answering this question my entire life. That fighting was my answer to the question, why, that it had always been sufficient, that it had never before been questioned. And that in the moment of being questioned by something that was not fighting, that was not doing anything I recognized as survival behavior, that was interacting with me the way a scholar might interact with an interesting insect, the answer was not sufficient. I lowered my weapon, not voluntarily, not as a decision I made. The weight of the insufficient answer made my arms drop, the same way extreme exhaustion drops your arms, the structural failure of the mechanism. The shape regarded me. The color was everywhere now. 3 more boys had run. I could hear them going. I did not move. Here is what I learned in the valley, in the time that followed, which was either minutes or hours or longer. Which time I spent in that color with the shape regarding me, and occasionally sending meaning through whatever channel had been opened in my mind. I learned it in fragments, in pieces that did not fit together neatly, that I have spent years trying to arrange into something comprehensible. The thing in the valley was old, older than the planet, older than the system. It had been in the deep, deep dark between stars, in the place where chaos lives and breathes and has its nature, and it had been gathering. Not energy, not followers, something else, something for which I still have no word. Significance, maybe. The kind of significance that accumulates when a thing has been alive long enough to develop a perspective on the universe that encompasses more than just the immediate moment. It had come here, to this valley, to this planet, because something had called it. Not summoned in the ritual way, not the candles and blood and screaming that chaos worshippers use, which I had seen, which I had interrupted several times purely because it seemed like a good fight. Something older than ritual had called it. A resonance. The planet itself had a quality, had always had a quality, that resonated with the thing in the valley, the way a tuning fork resonates with the right sound. And we were here. The Waaagh was here. The Waaagh was that I had built, that I had led to this world, that I had brought crashing down on this planet with a specific intention of having as much of a fight as possible. The Waaagh was here. We had been, the meaning informed me, without kindness, useful, not as opponents, not as soldiers, as a resource, as a concentration of something the thing in the valley required, something that fighting produces, something that violence generates, like heat, like a byproduct of combustion. The Waaagh had been burning for months. Enormous quantities of this byproduct had been generated, and the thing in the valley had been drinking it. It had called us here, not through any mechanism I could have detected, not consciously, not strategically, not in any way I could have guarded against, even if I'd known to guard. It had called us the way a drain calls water, by being there, by being the kind of thing it was, in the kind of state it was in, needing what it needed. I stood in the color and understood that every battle I had fought on this planet, every glorious moment of the Waaagh, every fight I had led with joy and purpose, and the absolute certainty that this was what I was made for, had been feeding something else. This is the thing that broke me, not the thing itself. Not its size or its wrongness, or the impossible color, or the silence or the smell. The thing that broke me was understanding that I had been used. That the most fundamental thing about me, the fighting, the joy of it, the purpose of it, the entire edifice of who I was, had been converted into fuel for something I had never consented to fuel. That I had been the biggest and it had not mattered. That biggest is not the biggest category. That the universe contains things for which biggest is not even an interesting measurement. I went back up the ridge. The shape let me go. I want to tell you it let me go because it feared me, but you know that's not true, and so do I. It let me go because I was done being useful in the way I had been useful, because the Waaagh was dispersing, boys running in every direction, the concentration broken. And perhaps because it had finished showing me what it showed me. The door it had opened in my mind had not been closed. I could feel it, a gap in myself. Air moving through where there had been solid wall, Musghal was waiting at the top of the ridge. He looked at me for a long time. His expression was the expression of someone doing the fastest possible calculation about whether the situation had changed sufficiently to make certain options viable. I watched him calculate. I let him calculate. "What happened?" he said finally. "Something big," I said. "Bigger than you?" I thought about the rock. The specific rock. The notable rock that had done some interesting things for a rock. "Yeah," I said. Musghal had been waiting 6 years to hear me say something like that. I watched him consider what to do with it. And here is where I will tell you something true about my kind that perhaps you did not know. Musghal looked at the valley. He looked at the color that was still moving down there, vast and patient and wrong. He looked at it for a long time. Then he stood next to me and looked at it with me. Not because he was afraid, not because he'd given up on challenging me, because whatever was down there was a larger problem than who was in charge of the Waaagh, and Musghal, for all his ambitions, was smart enough to understand that some problems are larger than the problems you arrived with. We gathered what was left. More had run than I'd realized. Of the 40 I'd brought to the valley, 23 remained, and of those 23, something had changed in all of them. A quality had gone out of them, the specific quality that makes an orc, the joy of it, the simplicity, the complete and uncomplicated relationship with the universe that is the greatest gift of being what we are. That quality did not come back. I want to be honest with you about this. In the days that followed, as we retreated from the valley, as the color slowly spread and the wrong smell covered more ground and 2 more scouting parties vanished, the quality did not come back. We fought, because fighting is what we do, but we fought differently, with a consciousness of the fighting that had not been there before, a watching of ourselves fighting, as if the door the thing had opened in my mind had also opened a window in each of theirs. You should know the thing left eventually. 3 weeks after the valley, the color receded over the course of a night. The wrong smell faded, slowly, over days after that, replaced by the regular smells of a planet that had been the site of a Waaagh, which are considerable, but at least familiar. The silence lifted. Things came back, cautious and uncertain at first, the scavengers returning to check if the landscape was survivable. Whatever the thing had come for, it had gotten, or had gotten enough. It went back to the deep dark between stars, or wherever it went, carrying whatever it was carrying. The valley was empty. The ground was changed, textured differently, the way ground is textured after something massive has rested on it for a long time. The color was gone. But the impression of the color remained, in the way that an impression remains in clay even after the object has been removed. And when the wind was right and you were standing at the rim of the valley and not paying careful attention to your own mind, you could feel, or almost feel, the edge of something that might have been the meaning that was not words, the door still there, still the faintest fraction open. I am telling you this from a long way away from that planet. I left. This is something that warbosses do not do. We do not leave. We do not retreat in the direction of somewhere permanently safer. But I left, and I am telling you this because I want someone to know what is in that valley, what the valley was, what it has been prepared for, whatever preparation the thing was performing during the months it fed on our fighting. The door in my mind is still open. I feel it especially at night, when things are quiet, when there is nothing demanding my attention. In the quiet, something comes through the door that is not quite the thing in the valley anymore. That is more like the aftermath of the thing in the valley, an echo that has been modified by the time it spent inside my head. It does not frighten me now. I have spent a long time learning to sit with it. What it says, In those quiet moments, in the language that is not language, is not threatening. It is not malicious. It is simply present, the way a very large and very old and very indifferent thing is present when it has brushed against you and moved on. It says nothing specific. It says with the full weight of everything it is that it continues. That it is continuing somewhere in the dark, moving toward whatever it is moving toward with the same patient inevitability it moved through the valley. I was the biggest. I am still the biggest, technically, of anything I have encountered since leaving that planet. But the category has changed. The category of biggest now has a door in it, and through the door is the open space where I used to have a wall. And in the open space is the knowledge that the universe contains measurements that make biggest irrelevant, that make fighting irrelevant, that make everything I was irrelevant in a way that is neither cruel nor kind, but simply true. There is a particular smell in the air tonight, here at the edge of wherever I am. Just the edge of it. Just the beginning of wrong salt underneath the regular smells of the world. Like something that has lived in a dark and lightless ocean for a very long time, has decided, again, that the ocean is not enough. I am the biggest. I am still the biggest. I have spent my entire life understanding that to mean something. I am starting to understand that it might be time to become something else. The smell is getting stronger.